Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to introduce our panel discussion. These are the topics we're going to discuss. We want to introduce you to a specific type of research, an approach to research, community-based research, and we'll talk about that with some examples today. Two of our panelists, Dr. Wayne Kelly and Fallon Brooke from Brandon University, couldn't join us because of flights. So we'll be presenting as well, but their contact information will be available in the slide deck as well. And I'll be speaking for some of the examples of projects that use this approach. Next slide. So we're going to start off. We have Dr. Julie Chamberlain and Sheldon Valiquette, both from the University of Winnipeg. I'll get them to explain their backgrounds and introduce themselves in a minute. And myself, I am from Winnipeg. I am the Executive Director of the Internet Society Manitoba chapter, and I'm also a graduate student at the University of Calgary, where my focus is digital equity in education and learning sciences. So I'll pass it over to Julie.
Yeah, hi, I'm Julie Chamberlain. I'm an assistant professor in urban and inner city studies at the University of Winnipeg. I'm not an Indigenous person. I come to this work and my interest in community-based research as it can support connectivity and digital equity from the perspective of wanting to respect and support and lift up Indigenous voices on issues that are of urgent concern, whatever those might be. That's some of the research that Sheldon and I have worked on in the North End in Winnipeg, and part of what we'll bring to you today. And I'm also the co-lead of the Community-Based Research Training Center at the University of Winnipeg. So I spend a lot of time teaching about research methods. I teach students and community researchers how to do research and some of the fundamental skills and values and kind of ethical questions and principles that we think about when taking this approach to research. Yeah. Want to say a little bit yourself?
Yeah, I just want to thank Chief Paul for letting us gather here today. My name's Sheldon Valiquette. I'm a recent graduate from the University of Winnipeg. I'm also Julie's research student. We've worked on a couple of projects together. I'm just happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for mentioning that, Sheldon. It's, I think, both of our first time on Unamagi, and we're really happy to be here. Did you want to say anything about this bit, the kind of like why we decided that topic? Yeah. Okay.
So I just want to frame this first. You may not think that research is something that you're doing. You may not be academics or have done capital R research before. But what I'll try to do is frame this in a project management kind of a framework, which maybe more of you are familiar with, and what we're kind of forced to follow when it comes to IT projects. So anywhere between 25% and 85% of all IT projects fail. And there's lots of reasons for that. There's lots of key factors that go wrong in an IT project all the way through. But one of the largest contributors to it is the work done or should be done early on. So in that, what we typically call the business case phase, which is a bad term, but we're forced to use sometimes, the business case where we look at the problem, we identify what the problem statement is, and we come up with the root causes of that problem, and we look at our options and our options analysis. That process is often done, it's either often skipped or done poorly. We use terms like feasibility studies. There are things, the duty to consult, where we do it in different levels of quality. So we go through this process, but each stage in the project management cycle is supposed to set the foundation for the next phase, to set the next phase up for success. So doing that business case, and again, I don't like the term, but if you look at identifying the problem and the root causes and those options, you have to do some research to get those answers. You need to interact with the people who are going to be your end users. And I'll sell this to you because it's a lot of work on the front end, but we usually end up, project managers and technicians usually end up at the other end of it, so implementation. But the things that you do, the work and the money and the time that you spend at the front end doing this research, building partnerships, and building that trust and communication and learning what's happening, that will all translate into a better implementation down the road. So the chances of success later in the project are going to be drastically influenced by the work in this first phase. So then when we get to research, there's lots of different ways to do it. There's lots of different traditions and different processes. Some are constrained by funding that you have, and some are just open to your knowledge or your interpretation. So we just want, I think that's the framing of what brings, I wanted to bring these two teams of researchers together to talk about the ways that community-based research can match up very nicely ideologically and kind of structurally with community network deployment, things like that. So that's kind of an idea to bring everybody in the room, because we're all coming from different aspects in policy and project management and technicians and stuff. But this is early on in the process when it's like, hey, we have a problem. This is that time frame. So that's.
Okay, so I'm going to introduce you a little bit to the concept of community-based research and what we're talking about when we say that. But the first term underlying community-based research is, of course, research itself. And it's a word that we use, I think, quite a lot in everyday life nowadays. You might be Googling something to answer a question that you have, or you might be debating your friends who say, no, I know more about this, I've done my own research. And so what we're talking about in this context is not necessarily academic research, not necessarily research where professional, full-time researchers are involved, but research really as systematic creation of knowledge, systematic collection of information. The systematic piece is really important because we do a lot of knowledge creation and gathering of information in many different roles that we might play, but it's the systematic aspect of it that really makes it research as opposed to something else. I like to break it down into that kind of very relatively simple definition, also because community-based research is really invested in having all of us in the room be able to look at ourselves and see ourselves as researchers or as potential researchers. You may already be engaged in systematic knowledge creation or systematic information collection and just haven't thought about it as research, or you may have potential in the future as part of your connectivity or digital equity work to be in a research role. And that can look a lot of different ways, but part of the values of community-based research is that all community members can be researchers if they want to be. You don't have to be, but if you want to be. So I put the umbrella on my community-based research slide because it's an umbrella term. There's a lot of other sort of acronyms that I deliberately took off the slide because I've noticed sometimes students sort of glaze over and pass out when they see all the different, the various different terms that can fall under that umbrella. But just to think of it as a broad approach to research that has some key principles, values, and goals that are connected to it that go beyond just like we want to create some knowledge, we want to get some information. Also, there are a few other things that we want to do at the same time that are really important. So one of the older definitions of community-based research comes from the Kellogg Foundation. Some of the roots of this approach are in the world of health research, public health research in particular, where there's a lot of investment in making sure that whatever you learn, whatever knowledge you generate, you can actually apply and people will be interested in using. But also, some of this approach has roots in indigenous research approaches that are much older than, certainly than the traditions that I was educated in the sort of the colonial university. But so community-based research is a collaborative approach to research that equitably involves all partners in the research process and recognizes the unique strengths that each brings. So it assumes that everybody is bringing strengths to research, whether you are a professional trained in research or not. It's invested in equity and in collaboration. And Crucially, community-based research begins with a research topic that's of importance to community. So when I'm talking to academics or students or faculty members about community-based research, what I'm often doing is advocating to them that they turn to their communities to find out what issues are pressing, what the knowledge needs are. But in this case, because we're in a room full of people who are invested in some way in the connectivity of Indigenous communities, you may already have kind of a question or a need or something that needs to be addressed, although you may also need or want help to kind of articulate what that is and find out what your knowledge needs might be. So in community-based research, there is this overarching set of goals that drives the process. So the process is really important, as well as your end goal of maybe having a completed study, having evidence that you can show for the viability of what you're trying to do or the feasibility of what you're trying to do. But there are goals that go beyond that. So equalization of power imbalances, so working in an equitable way where all the people involved in the process are working on a level playing field, or at least there's recognition of the different kind of power that we all hold as a student, as a professor, as the ED of an organization, or the various kind of different positions that we hold in the world and in the work. Also creating a sense of ownership of knowledge and of the research process that then belongs to the whole community. So this is where we start to really get into why this can be a useful approach for connectivity processes, because you may want already to build a sense of ownership and engagement and investment in a digital project, and if you take a research approach or a knowledge gathering approach that builds that kind of engagement, you're doing it from the outset, as opposed to kind of doing a study and then hoping that people are into it or believe it or agree with it. And also, it's also really invested in building trust, trust among everybody who's involved, so community members, researchers. And some of the key principles are that community-based research is community-led, as I said, for community benefit. There's an action orientation, typically, so we're not talking about a study that's just being done for the sake of it in order to generate the knowledge, although in certain contexts that can be really valuable. As an academic, I argue this. Sometimes that can be really valuable and very useful, but community-based research lends itself to something that you're ultimately going to want to take action on. The building of meaningful relationships. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the sort of the bad rap of research, as sometimes, as in the past, often being kind of extractive, where the relationships can be very surface level or very imbalanced in terms of power. But community-based research says, no, we have to pay attention to having really reciprocal relationships. And in this way, the community-based research approach has gained a lot from Indigenous research approaches, but also a lot of Indigenous researchers argue that it aligns well with particular cultural values where relationships are at the center, reciprocity is at the center. In community-based research, participation is also key. So it rarely involves just one sort of person at the head of a project who undertakes the project on their own. Sheldon's going to talk a little bit about his experience in the work that we've done, but the research it values hiring people in the community to do whatever kind of data collection you might need, whether it's interviews or focus groups or a survey or measuring something, whatever kind of information you might find you need. Hiring, paying, recognizing the labor of people in the community so that people can participate to the extent that they're interested and have the capacity to. And this can look in a lot of different ways. This is I slightly improved this crummy slide that I made a long time ago and have been using for far too long. But so there's kind of
Patent pending.
Patent pending, exactly. So there can be a real continuum of participation in community-based research. Or there's a continuum of participation in research in general. I think I've got like the far left end in research that wouldn't be considered CBR is where me as the faculty member or as a professional researcher, I design the study, I design the questions, and where community comes in is that they answer the questions. They're available for answering the questions that I have to ask. In the middle, where it can be more participatory, is where community maybe helps to identify issues and research questions, but it's still the professional researcher who does the research. All the way to the right side, the further end of a deeper level of participation, which is often ideally where we're aiming for in community-based research, and sometimes we land somewhere in the middle because there are also practical and resource considerations. Sheldon and I have worked on some very small projects together where we would have loved to have hired like many North End residents to be part of the project, but what we had was $5,000 and a year. And so sometimes there's those practical considerations that are real and genuine, but we're often ideally aiming for community leads and controls the research. So that's everything from the outset. And often, if you already have a connectivity problem or issue or need in mind, you're well positioned to be able to set the course for this kind of research project, which is part of why we kind of came to talk about these methods today. Because you probably already have the questions, or in conversation with folks who have like specific technical knowledge, can identify what the question is and what the process, or what kind of process would be good in order to meet your community's needs. And in this vision, community leads and controls the research, all of it from start to finish, defines, creates, analyzes the data, carries out the action plan eventually that comes in the end. This approach to research really exists in the context where research has, for many communities, a terrible reputation. There's and often like very awful specific histories of extraction, of harm, of approaches to research that have been, sometimes people talk about helicopter researchers, the people like me who, or people who look like me who kind of come in, do whatever it is they're interested in, and leave. And CBR is really a community-articulated approach that's like resistant to that kind of approach to research, which I hope is sort of clear in the values and principles that come up. But this slide I took from Research 101, which was a resource that was created by a community group in the downtown east side in Vancouver, where it's an example of how communities can and do articulate what kind of knowledge creation they want to see in their community and what they don't want to see in their community. And so they name what some of the pitfalls can be. And when CBR is done really well, it's structured to avoid the pitfalls and kind of unlock the potential of community-led research. So there are also, I think Joel will touch on this a little bit too, there are also, you may already be familiar, Indigenous community-specific frameworks. For example, OCAP for First Nations, which is about ownership, control, access, and possession of data that's created by and for and about First Nations specifically. There's also the USI framework, which was created by a network of friendship centers. And USI stands for utility, self-voicing, access, and interrelationality. It's also an example of where, in those cases, urban Indigenous communities, where people from many nations are living and working together, but have also articulated the values that are to guide any kind of knowledge creation. So some of those frameworks are available to you to follow, to use, to implement as they're relevant. But some of the pitfalls of bad research in the past is that sometimes they can undermine or have undermined the goals of communities, have met maybe outside goals and not so much the goals of communities themselves. Sometimes we see research, or it can be a little bit like setting up a committee to talk about a committee, about maybe having a committee to study an issue. And so there are experiences of that as well, where it can be kind of a sideline, but we know in connectivity projects that you're almost always going to need to do research in some fashion at some point. And so that's where kind of having a community articulated approach is taking the reins of something that's going to be happening anyways, I would say. And when it's not done well, research can end up being kind of irrelevant. A feasibility study can be conducted and then sit on the shelf, and that's the end of that, and there's nothing that we can necessarily do with it. And that certainly has been some of certainly Winnipeg's North End, where I work, where Sheldon and I have worked. There are a lot of bad experiences with research in the past. Those are a reality. And it's in that context that we were asked to take on a community-based project, actually. I'm going to say a little bit about it and then pass on to Sheldon to sort of talk about the project a bit. I moved to Winnipeg about 3 years ago, and I work in the Urban and Inner City Studies department at the University of Winnipeg, which is located in the North End. And the executive director of the North End Community Renewal Corporation, I was connected to because I was teaching also about community planning and community development. And she asked me, she approached me and essentially said, we have some research needs. And if you're interested in talking about it, like, we're interested in telling you what those needs are. And I kind of was like, oh yeah, absolutely, I want to hear about this. I'm invested in community-based research. I'm new to the North End. I want to build relationships. Part of what was happening, I kind of realized afterwards, is that I was working in a department that was in general had a level of trust in the community that I was kind of benefiting from. It's a department that the location came out of a community development process and a community planning process. And so in some ways, because I was connected to it, she saw me as somebody who could be approached. And the other thing was that I had no baggage in the North End because I was totally new in the community. And that was important because there had been crummy projects done in the past. But part of what CBR can do is build relationships that you might want to have, strengthen your networks, connect you to people, and also in this particular case, the organization and community groups in the North End really wanted to access research money in order to help meet community needs. Involving academics or involving university researchers or students can be a really good way to access other pots of public funds that are available when it's framed as scholarly research that might not be available otherwise. So what they wanted to do is that they wanted to do what is called a social return on investment analysis of small grants that are given out each year to small community projects. And I didn't know anything at all about social return on investment, and either did Sheldon, but I had at least a little bit of confidence that I could find somebody who maybe knew somebody who did know how to do that kind of work, and that was kind of how it started out. So Sheldon, I'm going to pass it off to you to talk a bit about why communities do CBR.
All right, so why do communities do CBR? One of the reasons communities partake in CBR is because it can lead to positive change. This was the case for the project Julie and I were a part of. The small grants we conducted this SROI on, the social return on investment, were intended to enhance the well-being of the community in which they were being given. Another reason why communities take part in CBR is because it can help educate and empower. When it came to the SROI we conducted for NERC, we, the researchers, did not come into the community thinking we knew which questions needed to be answered. and how to go about it. Instead, we sat and worked with NERC to determine which questions they wanted to be answered and the best way they thought we could go about it. CBR also helps to complexify the issue. When it comes to the CROI project we conducted for NERC, they knew the small grants worked and that they did in fact enhance the well-being of the community. They just did not have capacity to conduct an SROI themselves. Teaming up with the University of Winnipeg, we were able to pool our knowledge and resources to convey the effectiveness of these small grants. Another reason why communities partake in CBR is that it helps to create evidence. This was one of the biggest reasons that the CBR project was conducted in the first place. The small grants we were studying were in danger of having its funding cut. And as we mentioned previously, NERC knew these grants were effective at enhancing well-being, which is why they reached out to the U of W to help come up with a tool that they can help show their fundraisers the effectiveness of the grants. CBR can also create meaningful sources of income. CBR projects can also be used as a way to create meaningful sources of income. This was the case for our CROI project. Our project involved hiring student researchers, one of them being myself, who has both lived and worked within the community we were conducting our research. We also offered honorariums to those being interviewed as a way of showing that their time was valued. So now I'll just talk a little bit about what it was like for me personally working on a CBR project. For me, being introduced to CBR has been an amazing learning opportunity. I have had the privilege of being involved in several CBR projects. While working on these projects, I have gained and refined several valuable skills that I've been able to carry on to other projects and ventures. Just a few of these skills include setting up and conducting interviews, working with software to transcribe the interviews, writing reports, and one of the biggest ones for me is public speaking. Being introduced to CBR also has opened a number of doors for me. For me, things seem to happen pretty quick. When I first graduated with my bachelor's degree, I kind of thought that was it for academics for me. That was until I got hired as a research assistant on my first CBR project. It was all very new to me and something I never saw myself doing previously through the tutelage of my mentors and supervisors, I was able to gain the skills needed to succeed in CBR. Today, when I think about CBR, I now see it as something that not only that I can do, but it's something that I enjoy doing. For me, being introduced to CBR has also proven to be very useful for building connections. The first CBR project I worked on involved interviewing community organizations in Winnipeg's North End. Working in this community myself, it was awesome to see what the other organizations were doing and how we could assist each other. Today, I still have contact with a few of them and we continue to work with each other. CBR has also given me the opportunity to attend conferences like this, which is a great opportunity for like-minded people to come together and share their thoughts and ideas on how to make our communities better places to live.
Okay, so just to be clear, we're not getting kickbacks from the CBR community, so every membership to the researcher club we sell, we don't get $5. But we are selling as an idea and trying to convince people who are involved in this to maybe check this out. If this is something that makes sense, this is an established process, it does align very well, and there's lots of resources available if you're doing it yourself. Or if you are looking for others to do it. I think what we want to do is just get you to understand that from the community point of view too, you have rights and you have things that you should be in control of. If outside groups are coming in and conducting research on your behalf, or however that relationship is, it's something that you should be involved in. So we're not saying you have to do this. You don't have to all become academic researchers, but if you're involved in a community network project at some level, you're somewhere in there involved in research. So knowing both sides of it, what participants are doing, that relationship, what you should expect from the researchers, who controls that data, what happens to that data afterwards. That's why we mentioned OCAP and there are some other frameworks. Look at those examples that are already out there, look at other projects, both good and bad, and see where you want to fit into that. And make sure that you don't just throw your hands up and say, okay, come and do research. I don't know anything about research, right? You can be in this style, everyone is part of it. And then I'll use a couple of examples real quick. So the Internet Society Manitoba chapter has two kind of major projects going on right now. One, North End Connect, is kind of a on-the-ground, small area, practical project where we are building a community network in the urban center in North End, Winnipeg. Jewel and I will be doing a talk later this week about it, so I won't get into that project too much, but what I will do is reflect on our use of CBR in this project and what that got us. Because when I started that project was my first community-based research project as a student and as a practitioner, and I didn't go into it necessarily believing in it. It looked like a lot of work, and it is a lot of work, but I saw through the project the practical benefits of doing it that way. So first, if you just look at the research slice of the process, it's more work, right? It is definitely more work. It takes longer. There's more consultation, more communications. There's more partnership building. All of those things take longer. When they were saying like the community is involved in the question development, well, now you have 15 editors. You write a question and you have to check with 15, can you change this word? Can you do this? At the end of the day, that question is way better than it ever would have been if you just did it by yourself, because it has been crowdsourced and you're getting quality, but that takes time, right? But the thing that we often do is we only look at one column at a time. So if you don't just look at the research, but you look at the other things, partnerships, trust building, relationship building, accountability, coming into a place where people get to know your name and know that you're not just going to do this and run away, that has value that you will get back in the end. So I think what I'm trying to say is if you're looking at you're going to look at quality over speed, and it is more work, but in the end you're checking off more boxes than just that research thing. You're not just saying, yeah, okay, we looked at the thing and we're just going to do whatever I wanted to build anyway, right? So that process collectively is faster. And we saw that in the North End. So it's an ongoing project, research is embedded in it all the way through, but the first conversations that we had, the first meeting with Jewel that I had, these all came from coming in saying, hey, we have a question we want to ask you about, and then constantly validating it. Our first questions coming in saying like, hey, I've been told that the connectivity in this neighborhood is horrible and you would pay way too much and you need more of it. Is that true? Instead of me coming in and saying, hey, I've spent some time on the internet in my basement and I have all the answers, right? It's a totally different relationship when you come in and the first thing you're doing is asking a question. People will immediately engage. And then you're just building off of that. So you're taking the information that you're learning as you go through these interviews and you're reapplying it and revalidating it all the way through the process. The quality of the knowledge that's being developed out of this is much higher. Yeah, let's go to the next one. We also have a second project. And this one I won't have a huge amount of time, but I encourage you to either contact me or check it out. We're working with Brandon University. That's where Wayne and Fallon came into the conversation. And we are looking at all of Manitoba. What we're trying to do is look at past and present connectivity projects, good, bad, and ugly, through a community-based research lens. So we're going out and soliciting stories from First Nations, rural municipalities, urban centers, any place that has tried to do their own community connectivity project, and having them tell their stories through this platform. It's not us coming and asking questions and validating things, it's truly letting them tell the story about what went wrong, what went well, what would you do again, those types of things. Basically trying to take lessons learned out of multiple different projects all around the province to gather a body of knowledge that we can then turn into policy recommendations, calls for action, and try to make change at the provincial level, at the municipal level, and at the national level as well. So that's the end goal. The unique part about it, maybe the next slide maybe, is the way that we're incorporating podcasts. Normally in the academic world, knowledge mobilization ends up at the end. You do a little research project, you come up with some conclusions, you publish some stuff, and then maybe there's a podcast that's kind of promoting it or talking about it after it's all done. We're trying to bring the podcast process into the methodology itself. So these interviews that are normally done kind of on the side are being done kind of live on the podcast, then we're releasing them community by community as we go. It's a cool idea. It's very new to academics. It's making ethics boards all over the place cry. It's very interesting to kind of develop a process as you're doing it, and I don't think any of us on the project really have done podcasting before. So we're learning all these things as we go. But the idea that we're engaging along the way and letting the information that's coming in drive the agenda and drive the next question, and then that's getting more people to, the idea is that people will listen to the project and two things will happen. Either A, I have a story I want to tell and they'll participate in the project and the quality of our knowledge will get better, and or other communities might hear this thing and say, hey, that community sounds a lot like my community. We have that problem. It worked for them. Maybe we could look at something like that too. So it's a little bit of the knowledge mobilization and the methodology of data collection all wrapped into one. And if it sounds messy, it is. And it's taking way more time than we expected it to. But the quality of the work that we're getting and the byproducts are much better than you would get in a one kind of engagement research approach. So, yes. And if you have any questions, I think the next thing we're going to do is ask questions. So if you've got any questions, please feel free to go to the mic. So please check it out. We don't have episodes out yet. We have an intro so you can find where the podcast is, and we're in the process of doing some final edits on a couple of episodes right now. So please feel free to check it out and promote it. They will get better as we learn. So that's the last. So this is basically what we wanted to bring to you. This is nowhere near enough time to get into any of the details of it. We just wanted to bring some practical examples of where this has been used in connectivity and non-connectivity projects, and hopefully entice you into considering it and understanding your role in it, whatever it may be, and to link you to some resources if you are interested in it, where you can go to get more information, people who are interested in it. If you have a research need, having a partner organization and figuring out if they're a good fit for you, those are all practical takeaways from this. And then do we have any questions? Yep. Go ahead.
No, I was just wondering, like you're talking a lot of things. I haven't done research in dog's age anyway. But, do you guys use key informants, Delphi, anything like that, stratified random, or is it strictly just community-based, where it's, I did some work at Acadia University with a study there.
Is it possible to bring the microphone closer to your mouth?
Too tall.
Thank you.
No, I was just wondering about, things like key informants, things like that, Delphi, stratified random, things like that. I did some work at Acadia University doing a study there, and I did several for Dalhousie University. I worked with Dr. Fred Wynn, and we did a lot of First Nations studies. And, the thing is that we created a group that the community basically, determine the questions. We also looked at open-ended questions, closed questions, stuff like that, you know, and wants and needs of the communities, because we wanted to clarify that a want is very different from a need, you know. And so do you guys still do that sort of thing, or?
I think the short answer is yes, and then the like slightly longer answer is that what I see, and part of the reason that I depict the community-based research as an umbrella, is that you truly can use any methods that are useful and necessary for you using a community-based approach. So I've been involved in projects where there have been, you know, quantitative analysis of surveys, key informant interviews, focus groups, photography, video data, lots and lots of different stuff. Often, you know, often it will involve talking to people at some point, but sometimes it also involves like mapping your community, for example. And that's a very common method that also really lends itself to a participatory approach where people are involved in the mapping process and have some input into how it's done, and then also how the map is used in the end. But really, any possible methods that you can think of.
Yeah, I think the biggest difference isn't about the processes. It kind of will look the same maybe if you took a snapshot along the way, but it's the relationship between everyone involved, especially the relationship between the researcher
some
and the
of the things
researchee.
I would have liked to have done, but I didn't, is you mentioned mapping. You know, a lot of the communities within the First Nation, if you do asset mapping, you don't have to go outside of the community because you have qualified people within the community that can do those specific things that you're looking for.
Yeah, and that's an excellent example of asking the community and not coming in and judging that community on your criteria, even developing the criteria to know what do we have in-house, what do we need to go get, those things. It just kind of flips the script so that the community is driving the agenda, I think. That's...
Yeah.
Well, if we can move on to the next question, because then we're running out of time.
We went from, we've got tons of time to, we do not have tons of time, apparently.
That's Sally? Sally, please go ahead.
I just wanted to, on a point of clarification, some of the feedback that's coming from consultations with the CRTC is the casual reference to a lot of telecommunications projects failed for various reasons, but I just wanted to have it noted on the record that very few of those projects that fail are Indigenous-led. The Indigenous-led projects are doing just fine. If anything, there's decisions being made at policy tables that exacerbate or cause the failure, and they are tables that Indigenous persons that are actually conducting the projects are not sitting at. Decisions are being made over the heads of the Indigenous people. So we have an excellent track record for telecommunications projects.
And I think that's the thing. This shouldn't be new. Maybe these are new terms, or maybe the process isn't like known to you, but you're probably already doing a lot of this, right? The Indigenous worldview, knowledge, the way that things are looked at, these community projects and community-based research, they already kind of all line up. I don't know that everybody's familiar with it. So if you're struggling with it because you're not aware of it, there are some frameworks out there that could be helpful to you. There are some processes, there are resources out there that this could align with something you're already doing or need some help with. And one good point too that Julie mentioned is alternate streams of funding. Maybe you're not tapping into all of the research money. You might be taking either ISED money and using it for research or something, but maybe this will get you access to research money and or researchers, right? There are people who are in this field that might want to partner with your group and work with you on it. So I think those are the key takeaways. And I think that's the idea, is look at the relationship when you're involved in research. Where do you fit into it? Where is, from the community point of view, who controls this? Who owns this? Where do you want to go with it? And Is it a reciprocal relationship? Are you getting out as much as the researchers are? These types of things. So it's really just more of a framework and an understanding of a different way to maybe frame something and approach it with some structure. But it's probably very close to what you're doing already. Any last one?
Thank you very much for listening and for your questions, and hope to chat with you over the next few days.
We're here all week. Try the veal.